Okay, I'm going to try to explain to you why I think that this may possibly be true, even though my position currently is actually doing Agile coaching. So I do Scrum coaching, Agile coaching, Lean coaching, Java coaching, organizational change, and so on. I even wrote a book about, maybe you noticed my wife trying to sell a few copies outside. But still, I mean, this is a current position, and I'm going to try to give you a little bit of history, which may teach you a little bit something about the future. So first things first. So we in the software industry we have two streams of knowledge. One is the technology side of knowledge, and this is the part that 95% of this conference was about. And 95% of all talks about software industry is about technology, because technology is cool. I mean, lambdas, generics, so on, you know, so very cool. Groovy, Scala, Haskell, Clojure. But there is this other thing, it's called methodology, and actually we cannot live without this part. Unfortunately, we think it's boring. Why do we think it's boring? Most of software developments, for a day job, what they do, they try to find efficient solutions, and working in a team and working under a procedure doesn't seem very efficient. It seems kind of a little bit overhead on what I'm already doing well. And this is why we don't talk about this as much, and this is why most of people even try to fight against methodology. The main reason was that the methodology was traditionally very heavyweight. It was a lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff. So we now have the boring stamp on it. Unfortunately, although it's changing a little bit. Why do we even need this boring stuff? So first things first, nobody can do it himself. Maybe in the 60s, in the 50s, not even then, I'm going to try to show, but some academic projects can be done with a single person, but no, I mean, if you want to do something serious, you need a team. And this is where things become difficult. When you put a few people in the group, personal efficiency becomes lower, you know. You reach conflict states, you don't get the results that you want, because forming a team is really not easy. That brings us to some ideas about forming a team, how to do efficient stuff with more than one person. I mean, it's obvious that the most efficient stuff is doing it yourself. I mean, if you want to do it good, you do it yourself. But if you can't do it yourself, you need to work something. In the end, what we did, we copied from sport. This is Scrum. This is a movement from rugby. I mean, when people come together and they try to negotiate the ball, or move forward towards the ball, this is what we copied, and now this is called Scrum. This is our main formation in the software industry, and this is our current solution for team forming in some. Okay, but this is the current state. I'm going to show you how it developed. So up until the 1960s, so there were computers and software before you were born. So up until the 1960s, there was this guy called Edward Deming who promoted the PDCA cycle. It's plan, do, check, act. It's an iterative circle saying do something, check it, act upon your checking, and plan again, and so on. So this was the first idea, organizational idea, that promoted iterative development. Actually, it was the foundation of Scrum. It's the foundation of Lean. It's the foundation of the Toyota production system, and the foundation of the Japanese industrial revolution after the Second World War. Actually, he moved from Great Britain to Japan to teach their managers about the PDCA. Again, in the 60s, US government was one of the biggest buyers of software. I mean, software was still not a commercial commodity for households and for companies. It was reserved mostly for government. They did it iteratively. This is Project Mercury. The software for the Project Mercury was done as an incremental and iterative development software. So pretty much Scrum, or maybe Kanban-ish sort of thing. It was the 1960s. As far as technology goes in the 60s, this is what happened. COBOL, Fortran, Agola, Smalltalk. You see many different approaches, so not just many different languages, many different approaches. And so the technology stream was developing very, very fast. And in the methodology, we only have PDCA. So obviously discrepancy has started in the 60s. Then we moved to the 70s. This guy, poor little guy, Winston W. Roić, wrote an article saying, titled Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. This is the first article on the waterfall methodology of software development organization of teams or whatever. So he wrote the article. It was, I think, a 7-page article or something like this. He's actually a very nice guy. And people misunderstood it. This is what was on page 2. This is basically waterfall. You do the system requirements, software requirements, analysis, program design, coding, testing, and operations. But unfortunately, people didn't notice the arrows. It should go in circles. So what he did, he started the waterfall revolution, but not even trying to do it. He was talking about iterative development. Later, he tried to change it, but it was too late. In the same era we have this guy, Tom Gilb. Not many people know him. He's not as famous as Uncle Bob Martin or Ken Schwaber or Jeff Sutherland, all of these Agile guys. But this is the guy who started the Agile thing. This is actually a quote from his book, Software Metrics, which is a hugely influential book from in the software industry. And it was a book which was partly based on incremental and iterative software development. He said software development should be done incrementally in stages with continuous user participation and replanning with design to cost programming within each stage. This is basically the Agile Manifesto. This is 1973. But people ignored him. They somehow managed to read this article and follow it through. In the 70s, technology stream continued just fine. We have C still alive and kicking. Microsoft Basic, a very influential language for beginners. I mean, I know most of you don't like probably Microsoft Basic, but it was one of the most important languages for the propulsion of the software industry. It was installed on the initial versions of DOS, and it was free, so it was very good. So technology is happening. Technology is going on, I mean, much faster than the methodology. So we are now in the 70s. Please remember, in the 70s, it was still not as big as industry as it is today. I mean, today software is everything. But in the 70s, it was mostly government and banking buying software. Then we go to the 80s. The industry becomes a little bit more focused, and this is what happens. The Department of Defense is it's the Department of Defense of the United States. What they did, they started to think, okay, we are buying so much software, we need to make this formal. Somehow our methodology needs to be formal. They came back to this article, which they still misunderstood 10 years after, the Winston W. Roice's article about software development organization. And what they did, they made it a standard, DoD 2576, something like this. It became the obligatory standard for selling software to the American government, not only Department of Defense, but the entire government. Well, that made it the official standard for everything, because American government influences the American industry, and the American industry influences the world. So waterfall became a standard, and nobody knows why. People actually don't know even how the name came to life, because the name waterfall was never mentioned in the original article. The author says he never thought of the name, and so basically everything around waterfall was an accident. The acceptance, the naming, and so on. But somehow I'm sure that you've all been in many waterfall projects, even though you've born after this standard probably. Okay, this guy is still persisting. Tom Gilb, the same guy from the picture before. Tom Gilb still writing books, 1988, so it's before the 1990s still, in the 80s. He wrote this book, which is mostly based on incremental software development. His first book, Software Metrics, was just partly based on just a few chapters. This has many chapters on something that we would today call Agile software development. It's 1988. It's much before Scrum and stuff that we're using now. Okay, I'm again in the 80s. Technology is going forward. The number of new important languages per decade is pretty much around 6 or 7 or 8 each decade, even in the 60s, you know. So the guys from the technology department are still working and having fun and having their own lambdas and generics in the 70s, whatever. I mean, Objective-C, you probably heard of this language. It's the 1980s. So 1990s. This is where the explosion comes. Money, you know. So everybody in the software industry is driving Porsches. There is movies being made about geeks making money and marrying nice girls. So things needed to change a little bit in all directions. And guys started thinking. So it's 1992. This is actually the guy who coined the first agile methodology. His name is Alistair Cockburn. His method is called Crystal. It's not very popular today, but it's one of the first influences to the Agile Manifesto. Then we have Grady Butch doing UML, so he's thinking. So guys are starting to think about organizational part of software development. We have these two guys. Now they're not really friends anymore because each of them has their own alliance selling certification. They made a thing called Scrum. Actually, they didn't really make it. They found an article by two Japanese guys and then rewrote it into English. But this is how stuff is done. You know? Then we have this guy thinking about unified processing and starting rational. We have this guy, you know him, Kent Beck. I mean, probably the most influential guy in the technical part of software development. We have this smiley face, probably the guy with the most forwards to books ever written. And in 2001, so this is recent history, they all meet together. They say, okay, guys, we are doing stuff. This is quite similar. Let's coin the same name for it. And they name it Agile. Boom. Now we are all using Agile. So we started doing stuff good. After the guys that did Agile, we have further development. Some people said, okay, but this Agile, it's really actually lean. And lean is really actually Toyota production system. And Toyota production system is really just-in-time production and work in progress limits and stuff like this. So they all trace it back to the guy from the beginning, to Edward Deming, to the PDCA. And they say, okay, let's coin a methodology that's based originally on the Toyota production system. These two smiley faces, they're Popendix. They couldn't have any other last name. Popendix fits perfectly. These are two English couple. They're married and they go around and sell consultancy on something called lean software development, which is basically Toyota production system from the 1960s again. Then we have this guy, Mr. Anderson, again, Toyota production system, Kanban, thinking about stuff. I'm now filling your heads with so many methodologies, but they all come down to the same thing, iterative and incremental development versus sequential one-time only development. So you get the picture. I mean, things are starting to develop in the 1990s and they're exploding in the 2000s. So we have a huge gap here because in the early years it was only technology that was developing. Now we have the methodologies that are rapidly developing. Technology, don't worry, they're still developing. This is just the 90s. I didn't even have time for the 2000s, for the groovies and the whatnots. I mean, so now that I've shown you how it looked, I mean, there was a big gap and nothing was going on. There was the waterfall accident. What do you think that's going to be happening in the future? People are now investing in Scrum a lot. I mean, they're changing, they're transitioning, they're paying me to help them do that. I mean, everybody is just doing Scrum for everything. So what's happen? First of all, it's going to change. This acceleration that's started in the 1990s and followed into 2000 is not going to stop. I'm not sure if it's going to be disruptive changes, like stuff completely changes, or it's just going to be evolutionary changes like Lean and Kanban or Scrumban or Scrum and XP or whatever. I mean, but change is a journey. It's not going to stop. It just hasn't started until the 1990s, you know. And now that it started, it's going to continue. So my point is, don't get very comfortable with Scrum and extreme programming. You're going to see further things. You're going to see them very soon, most likely. Why do I think this? I mean, the reason is because the methodologies are now somewhere in the 1970s. You remember that the technology part of my presentation was developing in the 1960s, 1970s. Methodology started in the 1990s. So we're only 2 decades old in the methodology department. So we're somewhere in the 1970s of the development languages. And things are going to grow from there because there is a lot of potential. We actually, what we did, we basically copied the Toyota production system. It's the thing from the 1960s. We did nothing personal to it. We just copied the Toyota production system. This is the car industry, and the software industry is very famous for being innovative. But we still haven't started being innovative in the methodology department, and I expect it to become soon, near future. So this is what happened. So Mr. Gilb, this is the pointer. In the 1970s, he writes a book about incremental development. In 2001, we started understanding what he's saying and using it. So there's a 30-year gap between something that was already written in a book, probably available, highly available in bookstores, and until popular usage begins and everybody starts saying, wow, this is the best thing. Where has this been for the last 30 years? Here, it was here. So, based on the waterfall accident, can we assume that Scrum is also an accident? My personal opinion, pretty much so. There were these two guys, Ken and Jeff, that rewrote an article by the other two guys. I can't remember Japanese last name, sorry. So these other two guys wrote an article, the new product development game in the Harvard Business Review. Then Ken and Jeff just rewrote it and started to develop it. And then every one of us started using Scrum for everything. Not only software development or even not only product development, because Scrum is basically for product development. It's not for contracting, not for maintenance. Pretty much the way we are using Scrum now is an accident. Because there was nothing better, we started using Scrum for everything. We can safely assume that there is a better thing already being tried somewhere. Maybe even documented, maybe even available on Amazon in 10 books. But since we are quite slow on catching up, we still don't know its name. So what this new thing should fill in? I mean, what Scrum and extreme programming and Agile generally, I mean, and Lean and Kanban are not good at. They're not good at scaling. Everybody is trying to scale Agile. There's millions of scaling frameworks. Everybody is trying to make famous by promoting his own scaling framework. So this is one thing. So the other thing is contracting. Scrum, I'm going to talk about Scrum because the latest state of Agile says that Scrum is used by around 70% of Agile users. Scrum doesn't know about contracting. Scrum doesn't care about customers. He thinks we are all friends. So this is not the case. This is why it's usually used with some sort of PMI-ish kind of thing. Transitioning. Scrum says transition to Scrum now. Point A, U, point B, Scrum. So nothing in between. There are many transition frameworks available by many different consulting companies. So this is something that this is a place for improvement. Lean is a little bit better on this because it starts with what you have, but Scrum is currently the standard. Maintenance. Scrum sucks at maintenance. Excuse me, YouTube. And Lean is perhaps a little bit better, but Scrum and Lean don't play well together because in Scrum you need a dedicated team and a dedicated time frame. In Lean you have something a little bit different and you can't use the same team for the different methodologies. So whatever is going to happen or has probably already happened but still we don't know it, should fix at least these 4 things. Okay, unfortunately, I can't tell you what it is. I've invested a lot of time, I've written a book, but obviously the issue with methodology is that really it probably just is boring and nobody is writing about it. You need to dig deeper, you need to try it yourself, you need to find in the obscure corners and maybe, just maybe in 30 years we find something that's already available and currently somebody is using it at Bell Laboratories or IBM or somewhere in Japan. Okay, hopefully I've told you not to become too comfortable with Scrum, but if you have any questions, I'm available. Bulat, you asked English to ask a question.
So in your presentation, you connect the technology and methodology, and saying that technology is kind of going faster.
It's going steady. It started earlier. This is what I'm saying. It started earlier.
Yes. But you also, as you said, methodology is used for so many different industries. So can you explain how do you see them connecting?
They're part of the same process. I mean, you work in a company that benefits both from technology and methodology. I'm sure that you use some sort of methodology in your process. This is why I try to connect it. I just what my takeaway for this connection is that methodology started developing 30 years later, and this is why I think there is a lot of place for improvement. This is why I was just using technology to help us understand that we as a creative group of people, a creative community, still have a lot of place to improve, because we basically, as I said, did nothing creative so far. We just copied. Thanks. No more? Okay. Just a short thing. We're now going to connect the two rooms and have a closing panel in a common place, because there's too many of us still left to just use one room. Thanks so much.